Hi, and welcome to In 10, where we take 10 minutes to ask journalists the questions. I'm Kamina Lyle from the Dart Centre Asia Pacific. We are a resource centre and global network of journalists, researchers, and health professionals dedicated to improving media coverage of trauma, conflict, and tragedy. The Dart Centre is a project of the Columbia University Journalism School and has been operating for over 20 years. In 10 is our podcast where we talk to news media folk about the craft of journalism. We want to know how our colleagues are taking care of themselves, their sources and their stories. So we're delighted to have Lungi Poiva Cherelle Jackson here with us today. Cherelle is an independent Pacific journalist. She became editor of the Samoa Newsline Newspaper when she was 25 years old and has covered political, environmental and human stories throughout the Pacific. She has contributed to the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Al Jazeera, Forbes, the Huff Post and The Guardian, among others. She has won awards and fellowships from the Reuters Institute, the Rockefeller Foundation and our very own Dart Centre. She is based in Samoa, but today is joining us from Oregon in the United States. Welcome, Cherelle. I'm going to ask by asking why you're not in Samoa.
Hey, yeah, Talofa Lava, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of In 10 today. It's very exciting. I'm not in Samoa because I'm stuck here. I was in the US for a fellowship and the New Zealand lockdown, and then Samoa decided to close its border. So for the time being, I'm here until Samoa decides to accept its citizens back in country.
Wow, that's tough. And how long has it been so far?
So it's, I was here in January. I was meant to return in early April. So, you know, the impact of the lockdown has only been about 6 weeks.
Yeah, and how's that affecting your work?
Tremendously so. It's very difficult to cover stories of the pandemic about the Pacific Islands when you're not actually in the Pacific Islands.
And are you finding ways around that challenge?
Yes, so one of my first pieces was for The Guardian was on the fact that Samoa actually deported its own citizens, her own citizens, because of concerns over COVID-19. So there was a group of 8 people who were traveling from India through Fiji, and they put them back on the plane to Fiji. So I was looking at I interviewed some legal experts on the human rights violations as a result of denying entry to citizens.
And how did that story unfold? How did you actually manage to find that story, find the people into, like all of this remotely?
Yes, so Facebook can be quite a wonderful thing with all its flaws. Samoans are quite active on Facebook. In fact, they partially live on Facebook. So a lot of the information is already on Facebook. I managed to speak to the people who were sent back. I was able to track where they went through Facebook, and I was also able to track down some experts and witnesses. I was also able to contact the government sources and get press releases from government through email. So it was all done virtually.
And has that been a trend that's kind of pre-COVID-19 as well, like that sort of broader, I guess, brush of news gathering through all of those sources that you've now just kind of built on now that you don't have a choice?
Certainly. So in 2019, it's interesting you should ask that. In 2019, I conducted a study with UNESCO and the Journal Association of Samoa on the impacts of Facebook on the work of journalists in Samoa, and found that well over 60% of journalists used Facebook as a source of news. So like they would find news on Facebook and then, gather information and verify from there. But it was the easiest way to find sources and to verify information through witnesses and so forth. So yes, the practice that I did use pre-COVID certainly has come into very good use now that I'm actually not in country.
And so what's your sort of day look like? What's your routine now? Because as well as not being in country, so not being able to go places to get the story, you've also got a time zone challenge as well, I would imagine.
Yes, so about 2 p.m. is when everyone else wakes up in Samoa. So it's good. I kind of have I'm ahead of the game, so to speak. So routine is like I would get up. I'm actually right now working on a project with global journalists. So a lot of my time is devoted to communicating with other journalists around the world. So when anything pops up on Facebook among the Pacific community, I then kind of use that as leads and follow up on the story. Additionally, I would look at global stories and see avenues of localizing it in Samoa.
So it sounds like you've kind of really adapted really well to how your craft and your news gathering skills have had to change, or you've built on old other skills that you've been building up over the years. What about kind of at a personal level? Like, how are you kind of taking care of yourself and looking after yourself and your family, given this incredible disruption?
That's a very Dat question to ask, isn't it? And you certainly wouldn't be Dat without that question. How am I looking after myself? Well, Netflix is such a nice kind of escape avenue. So we do a lot of walks with the children, spending time with the kids, movies, reading. The news has become in the US itself, it's not really an escape. That used to be my escape, was to read about what was going on in the world. But when you're in the US, it's even more distressing to read the news. So I find ways that I love watching certain documentaries and and exploring around the area within reason that I'm at.
And you mentioned that you're working a lot with global journalists on a global journalism project at the moment. What's your understanding about how journalists across the world are responding to this crisis on that very dark question, personal level?
I mean, it really differs depending on the context. There's some countries that are treating journalists as essential workers and are therefore understanding of their role within the crisis. There's other countries that are not treating journalists as essential workers and therefore shun them, try and demean them. And then there's the US, whose leader tries his very best to discredit the role of the media. So from what I'm seeing and the conversations I'm having with journalists worldwide, it's a mixture of both kind of like suppression, but also a sense of empowerment, because journalists have quite a crucial role that they play in the crisis, and that is in the age of the infodemic, so to speak. It's the role of the journalist is so important in sifting through the misinformation, but also ensuring that relevant information is relayed to the audiences that they serve.
Yeah, I'm loving this idea of empowerment. So, do you think that part of what's happening is that journalists are learning to kind of value ourselves and value our craft in different ways, potentially in the light of this? Obviously, there's some very tangible results of reporting accurate information. The communities are empowered and are safer. But there's also a kind of response to this kind of negative onslaught that occurs about our profession as well. I'm loving the fact that you're talking about that as an empowerment thing. Tell me more about how you're seeing that play out.
In Samoa, there's a lot of criticism of journalists. We are called gossiping or gossipers. There's particular terms that go with it. But it's in that hostility, we find solidarity among ourselves. And I'm seeing that here as well in the US. The more Trump criticizes journalists and the media, the more they band together. And so I think that's where this empowerment comes from, is that they're seeing the value of the work that they do, and they're supporting each other in ensuring that the work is still being done, and that there's still, there's a fallback that we can kind of rely on each other for that support.
It's a wonderful place to finish this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure, and I hope you can get to go home soon.
I hope so too. If the planes don't start going to Samoa, I might start get a canoe and start sailing soon.
Well, it's been done before.
Right? That's how we got there.
Thank you, Cherelle. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah.